First classical piece I want to discuss this week is Debussy's Suite Bergamasque. Started in 1890 when he was only 28 years old, it took him nearly 15 years to complete this piece. During that time, he was completely reworking the piece, revising and editing it in many different places, as well as changing the actual title a number of times. And while the entire work is absolutely phenomenal, the best part of it has to be the third section, which is commonly called Clair de Lune. There's such a range of tempos and movement throughout the entire piece, but in the third piece, it's a lot more standard and together. And you get this much slower feeling that perfectly reflects the tone of moonlight that runs throughout. And there's this beautiful sense of solitude that is impossible to deny. It's the way that this portion rises and falls with such grace that makes it so unique. And over the decades, it's been worked into countless films in many different ways. There's this almost whispered feeling that you get from the piano progression when it's played properly. And honestly, this is just one of those pieces that's really tough to not fall in love with. The entire work is nothing short of brilliant, but that third piece is something you absolutely have to know. And to tell you the truth, you'd be hard-pressed to find a more moving piece from any piano work in history. The next classical piece you absolutely have to know is Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra. When it comes to the opening note and feeling of a piece, nothing, not even pop music, can compete with this one. And it has been massively popular all the way back to when it first premiered in 1896. The way that the horns give way to the timpanis is iconic unto itself, mostly thanks to Stanley Kubrick. But this piece was a classical concert staple even before the film came out. The work in its entirety actually runs the better part of 30 minutes when it's performed live, and it has 9 very distinct sections with only 3 formal pauses in the entire work. The names of each of the movements, like the title of the entire work itself, were pulled from the work of Nietzsche, and that also helps it to have this narrative feel like nothing else in the classical canon. There's this almost nervous tension that you can feel in a number of the sections, and this is easily one of the more wonderfully intense pieces you'll ever hear. Also, in the early 1940s, Strauss himself actually conducted a performance of this with the Vienna Philharmonic, and the performance was used as an early experiment in high-fidelity recording. Honestly, the second you hear the opening notes on this, you're going to know exactly what it is, so now you know exactly what it's called. Finally, let's look at Chopin's Nocturne Opus 9 No. 2. Completed when he was only 20 years old back in 1832, this is one of the finest examples of the rounded binary style of classical music. And you can hear the sections become more and more elaborate every time they turn back to the main theme. There's this graceful bounce and movement within the opening that's been used so many times over the decades in movies. And yet it's the almost waltz-like feel this has that keeps it a favorite across the globe. The notes are pretty widely spaced here, and that's why it has such a meditative, relaxed move throughout. And in the end, the overall energy rises just enough to make it a perfect punctuation before sliding back into that calm feeling that you just can't get enough of. This is just one of those truly perfect moments within the world of classical music, and even for people who don't regularly listen to the genre, this is just one of those you're gonna dig. Classical music remains the foundation for nearly every style of modern music, and it's impossible to overstate its importance. So make sure you take some time this week and get your classical on.